Some men become colder the deeper their feelings grow. That is the part nobody talks about. The closer they feel to someone, the more confusing their behavior becomes. One moment they seem emotionally distant, and the next moment there is softness in their eyes that feels impossible to fake. This is especially true for avoidant men. Men who struggle with vulnerability rarely reveal love through dramatic words or obvious affection. Instead, their emotions escape through small behaviors they cannot fully control. And strangely, some of the clearest signs appear during intimacy. Most people misunderstand avoidant attachment completely. They assume emotional distance means emotional emptiness. But psychology shows something very different. Many avoidant men experience deep emotional attachment while simultaneously fearing emotional exposure. Their nervous system treats vulnerability like danger. That is why they pull away after closeness. That is why affection sometimes feels inconsistent. And that is why physical intimacy becomes one of the few moments where their emotional mask starts slipping. During lovemaking, emotional defenses weaken. The walls they spent years building become harder to maintain. Tiny changes begin appearing in their behavior, changes most people overlook completely. A softer touch, longer eye contact, emotional presence that feels unusually genuine, a need to stay close afterward instead of creating distance immediately. These behaviors seem small on the surface, but psychologically they reveal something much deeper happening internally. In this video, you will learn the 5 subtle things men only do during intimacy when their feelings are genuinely real, especially men with avoidant attachment patterns. You will understand why avoidant men struggle to express love directly, how emotional vulnerability secretly changes their behavior, and why some actions during intimacy reveal more truth than words ever could. Some of these signs are rarely discussed because they happen quietly. There is no dramatic confession, no movie-style moment, just emotional shifts that slowly expose the attachment they try so hard to hide. And the final sign may completely change the way you understand avoidant men forever because it reveals the exact moment emotional walls temporarily collapse. For a brief moment, the guarded version of him disappears, and the emotionally connected version underneath becomes visible. Most people miss this completely because they focus only on physical behavior while ignoring the emotional patterns underneath it. This video is deeper than relationship advice. It is about understanding the hidden psychology behind emotional avoidance, vulnerability, and genuine attachment. Because sometimes the people who struggle the most with expressing love are feeling far more than they ever say out loud. Stay until the end because each sign builds on the next, and the final insight explains why avoidant men often show their deepest emotions in indirect ways that even they barely understand themselves. Welcome to our channel, where we explore the hidden psychology of love, attachment, relationships, and human behavior. Subscribe now and join us for more deep emotional insights that help you understand people on a completely different level. The first change usually appears in the pacing. An avoidant man who is emotionally detached often treats intimacy like a temporary escape from stress, loneliness, or emotional pressure. There is usually a certain urgency in the way he approaches the moment. His focus stays heavily on the physical side of the experience, while emotional connection remains limited in the background. Even when affection exists, there is still a feeling of distance underneath it. The moment moves quickly because slowing down creates emotional exposure, and emotional exposure is exactly what avoidant people spend most of their lives trying to control. But something quietly changes when his feelings become genuine. He starts becoming emotionally present in ways that are difficult to fake. The experience feels slower, calmer, more connected. There is less emotional detachment in his behavior because his attention slowly shifts toward the person instead of only the experience itself. He becomes more aware of emotional comfort, reactions, energy, and closeness. Small pauses start appearing naturally. The silence between moments feels softer instead of emotionally empty. There is less pressure to rush toward an ending because deep down, he starts valuing the connection itself. This shift happens because genuine attachment affects avoidance differently than most people realize. When emotional feelings deepen, intimacy stops being only physical stimulation. It begins activating emotional bonding at the same time. That combination can feel extremely overwhelming for someone who normally protects themselves from vulnerability. So instead of using intimacy as an escape from emotions, they slowly begin experiencing intimacy as emotional closeness itself, and that changes their entire behavior. He may start paying closer attention to whether you feel emotionally safe. His body language softens without him even realizing it. His energy feels less distracted, less emotionally absent. There is more patience in the moment because emotionally invested people naturally slow down around things they genuinely care about. Psychology researchers often describe this as emotional attunement, where a person becomes deeply focused on another person's emotional state without consciously planning to do it. One of the biggest signs appears after intimacy. Avoidants who are emotionally disconnected often create space immediately afterward, sometimes through silence, sometimes through distraction, sometimes through emotional withdrawal that feels subtle but noticeable. But when feelings become real, that instinct slowly weakens. He stays present longer. The closeness continues after the physical moment ends. The emotional distance feels smaller than before. Because when feelings become real, avoidants stop treating intimacy like escape. And that is usually where the second change quietly begins. The second sign is much quieter, but emotionally it reveals far more than most people realize. He starts maintaining eye contact more often. And for an avoidant man, this can feel far more intimate than physical touch itself. Most people see eye contact as something simple, but psychologically it creates emotional exposure. It forces presence, it removes distance, and avoidants usually struggle with anything that makes them feel emotionally seen for too long. That is why emotionally detached intimacy often lacks sustained eye contact. There may be moments of connection, but they usually disappear quickly. His attention shifts away, his focus becomes distracted. The emotional intensity behind prolonged eye contact can feel uncomfortable because it creates a level of closeness that avoidants instinctively try to regulate. Looking deeply into someone's eyes during intimacy leaves very little emotional space to hide behind. But genuine feelings slowly change this pattern. When an avoidant man becomes emotionally attached, his focus naturally shifts toward you more often. He starts watching your reactions carefully. Not only physical reactions, but emotional ones too. There is a different level of attention in the way he looks at you. Less detached, less surface level. The eye contact feels quieter and more emotional instead of confident or performative. Sometimes there is even hesitation in him, almost like part of him feels emotionally exposed without fully understanding why. That hesitation matters more than people think. Avoidants are usually very skilled at controlling emotional access. They manage vulnerability carefully because emotional exposure can trigger anxiety internally. But deep eye contact during intimacy interrupts that control. It creates a moment where emotional connection becomes impossible to fully avoid. And when genuine love exists, those moments begin lasting longer than before. You may notice him looking at you during small, silent moments instead of constantly avoiding emotional stillness. His expression softens in ways that seem unplanned. There is less emotional guarding in his face. Sometimes he quickly looks away afterward because the vulnerability becomes too intense for him to hold comfortably. That push and pull often reveals emotional attachment happening underneath the surface. For avoidance, eye contact during intimacy can feel more vulnerable than words. Words can be controlled, rehearsed, filtered, but sustained emotional eye contact creates raw emotional presence in real time. And many avoidant men secretly struggle with the intensity of being emotionally visible to someone they deeply care about. The deeper the attachment becomes, the harder it becomes for him to emotionally disconnect from those moments. Physical closeness slowly starts affecting him emotionally in ways he never expected. The third sign usually appears in the way he touches you. At first, the change can feel almost invisible. There is no dramatic shift in personality, no sudden emotional confession, but the energy behind his behavior starts softening in ways that happen naturally when emotional attachment becomes genuine. His touch becomes more careful, more aware, more emotionally connected. and most of the time, he does not even realize he is doing it. Avoidant men are often highly focused on maintaining emotional control. Even during intimacy, there can sometimes be an unconscious emotional distance protecting them internally, but when real feelings begin developing, the nervous system slowly reacts differently. Emotional bonding activates protectiveness. Instead of staying focused only on their own experience, their attention begins expanding toward the emotional and physical comfort of the other person. That is where gentleness quietly increases. He starts paying closer attention to your reactions without needing to be asked. Small affectionate behaviors appear more naturally, tiny pauses, softer touches, more emotional patience. The overall energy feels less emotionally guarded and more emotionally caring. Even his body language changes in subtle ways because attachment slowly lowers defensive behavior. His nervous system becomes less focused on protecting itself from vulnerability and more focused on protecting the emotional connection itself. This is one of the least discussed parts of avoidant psychology. When avoidants truly bond, their nervous system slowly shifts from self-protection to emotional protection. That internal shift changes intimacy in ways that are difficult to fake consistently. Aggressive energy often decreases because emotional closeness starts carrying more emotional meaning for him. There is greater awareness of emotional safety, greater sensitivity toward comfort. The experience feels warmer emotionally even when very little is being said verbally. And sometimes this surprises avoidant men themselves. Many of them are deeply unfamiliar with sustained emotional vulnerability. They are used to controlling emotions, minimizing attachment, or disconnecting internally whenever closeness becomes too intense. But genuine attachment changes the emotional weight of intimacy. Suddenly, the person in front of them emotionally matters in a much deeper way than before. Their actions start reflecting that attachment automatically. You may notice moments where he becomes unexpectedly tender without any obvious reason. His voice softens, his movements slow down slightly, the emotional distance feels weaker than before. There is more attentiveness in small details because his mind is no longer focused only on the experience itself. He is no longer only thinking about how intimacy affects him. He starts caring deeply about how it affects you. And once that emotional protectiveness begins developing, the connection often starts extending far beyond the physical moment itself. One of the biggest differences appears after intimacy ends. This is the moment many people overlook completely, even though it often reveals the deepest emotional truth about avoidant attachment. During intimacy, emotional walls can temporarily weaken because physical closeness naturally lowers emotional defenses, but afterward, many avoidants instinctively begin rebuilding those walls again. Vulnerability creates internal discomfort for them, even when the experience itself felt emotionally meaningful. That is why emotional withdrawal after intimacy is common in avoidant behavior. Sometimes it appears through silence, sometimes through distraction, sometimes through an emotional shift that feels difficult to explain but easy to feel. The warmth suddenly decreases, their attention moves elsewhere. They create subtle emotional distance because their nervous system begins trying to regulate the vulnerability they just experienced. For avoidance, emotional closeness can feel comforting and overwhelming at the same time. But genuine love slowly changes this pattern. When an avoidant man deeply cares about someone, he often struggles less with staying emotionally connected afterward. He lingers longer instead of rushing away emotionally. The closeness continues naturally. There is less urgency to escape the emotional intensity of the moment. His energy feels calmer and more emotionally open because the connection itself starts feeling emotionally safe rather than emotionally threatening. You may notice him talking more softly afterward. His tone changes in ways that seem almost unconscious. He stays physically close without appearing restless or emotionally distant. Small moments of affection continue naturally because emotional attachment is still active inside him even after the physical moment ends. The emotional connection does not suddenly disappear the second intimacy is over. That shift matters more than most people realize. The after moment often reveals more truth than the intimacy itself. Because anyone can perform connection during emotionally intense moments, but emotional presence afterward reveals whether vulnerability created emotional closeness or emotional discomfort internally. Avoidants who are emotionally detached often feel an immediate need to regain independence after vulnerability. But when love becomes genuine, emotional closeness starts feeling less threatening to their nervous system. There is usually a softness in him during these moments that feels difficult to fake consistently. The silence feels emotionally warm instead of emotionally distant. He seems more relaxed, staying near you, more emotionally settled, less guarded than before. And even though he may still struggle expressing emotions directly, his behavior quietly reveals that the connection matters deeply to him. For many avoidants, this is one of the hardest emotional shifts to hide because staying emotionally connected after vulnerability requires trust on a very deep psychological level. And the final sign is usually the one avoidants struggle to hide the most. Avoidant men rarely love in obvious ways. Their emotions usually appear quietly, hidden inside behaviors most people never pay attention to. That is why loving an avoidant person can feel confusing sometimes. The connection is there, but the expression of it looks different from what people expect. Their feelings often leak through small emotional shifts instead of dramatic words or constant reassurance, through the way they stay present a little longer, through the way their voice softens without realizing it, through the way emotional distance slowly becomes harder for them to maintain. Because when an avoidant man genuinely loves someone, intimacy stops being only physical. It starts becoming emotional exposure, emotional trust, emotional safety. And for someone who spent years protecting themselves from vulnerability, that shift changes everything happening internally. Many avoidants are fighting silent battles inside themselves during closeness. One side of them wants connection deeply, the other side fears losing emotional control. That is why their love often appears indirectly instead of openly. They may struggle saying certain emotions out loud, but their behavior slowly starts revealing truths their words still cannot comfortably express. And the deeper the attachment becomes, the harder those emotional truths become to hide. When intimacy starts carrying emotional safety instead of emotional pressure, that is usually when genuine attachment has begun. That is when the walls weaken. That is when emotional presence quietly replaces emotional distance. And that is why the strongest sign an avoidant man loves you is not intensity. It is emotional presence. It is the moments where he stays emotionally open instead of emotionally escaping. The moments where his guard lowers naturally, the moments where vulnerability quietly appears in ways he cannot fully control, because for someone terrified of vulnerability, staying emotionally open during intimacy is one of the deepest forms of love they can offer. If this video helped you understand avoidance psychology and emotional attachment on a deeper level, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful insights about relationships, human behavior, emotional connection, and the hidden psychology behind love.